Coming up in Lecture 3, Part 3, Decolonization. You know, giving people their stuff back.
Shut up and sit down.
Okay, so decolonization. It's about addressing the Euro-Western or Anglo-European research approaches to research. And there are really two parts to decolonizing research. The first is creating and using strategies to liberate the colonized mind from oppressive conditions that silence and marginalize people's voices. So the focus in this research is to develop understandings that can further a decolonizing process, and doing this by listening to previously unheard voices in a way that maintains integrity to those people's knowledge-making systems. The second is the restoration and development of cultural practices, thinking patterns, beliefs and values that contribute to the advancement and empowerment of colonized peoples. So there are a number of ways this liberating process can be part of the research. And it can be part of all the sort of all research that we do.
We do not colonize.
One way of thinking about this, which we'll look at a little later, is the development of ethics guidelines. And what we're going to talk about here in this part is strengths-based research.
And it is extremely strong.
But first, let's have a look at the principles of decolonization. So the principles of decolonization situates research as part of a broader political struggle. So it's part of creating the conditions for Indigenous people to claim control of their own lives and of claiming control over the ways their lives have been represented through research. Now, the broad second principle is that of liberation. So freedom from oppression.
Freedom from oppression and freedom from tyranny.
In research, that oppression has been through research being done on them for the interests of others.
Involving them instead of exploiting them.
Now, when it comes to decolonizing research, we've got three principles, and we shall think of these in terms of Australian Aboriginals, but it can be applied to any Indigenous group that's experienced colonization. So first, research must serve those first two broad principles, and it then needs to place Indigenous people at the center of research methodologies and at the center of the process, the research process, whereby, that process whereby knowledge is constructed about them. Now, remember, in the past, researchers had unlimited access to Aboriginal people in whatever way, shape or form researchers wanted, and for whatever purpose the researcher had in mind.
Remember what happened to the Aborigines?
And then taking that data, when the researcher had done their research, they took their data and used it to serve the purposes of furthering the colonization project. To validate such practices that sat behind the stolen generation and other social policies and social practices that marginalized, excluded and oppressed Indigenous people. Now, research has also got to reflect Aboriginal ontologies and epistemologies, which are often very different to the ones from Anglo-European.
You don't respect nature or other culture.
Very different from the Anglo-European ones, very different from those epistemologies and ontologies that we're familiar with. Now, we'll cover this in the next part of the lecture. So, there are 6 strategies that are commonly used in the colonization of research. The first is deconstruction and reconstruction. Deconstruction means interrogating theories and practice. So, interrogating psychology's deficit approach to Indigenous people through psychometric testing and other distorted accounts of people, and understanding how such theories and practices were put together and the consequences of those practices. Then the task is to reconstruct, to retell the past from an Indigenous perspective. The second strategy is of self-determination and social justice. And here are a couple of ways this can occur. First, through ensuring that research methodologies are used the research methodologies used are embedded in Indigenous histories, experiences and ways of perceiving reality, but also their Indigenous value systems. And this is a way of giving voice to the researched a research partnership with Indigenous people.
Why? Because he lost his voice, and that's that.
Second, we can undertake research that promotes and supports the well-being of Indigenous people, being clear to ensure that well-being is defined by the Indigenous community. And the third strategy is ethics. Now, this is a big, big area, and it's about developing ethical guidelines to protect Indigenous knowledge. It's also about engaging in self-reflection and self-questioning to consider the ways you may be excluding Indigenous people from the research process.
What, you mean, am I a racist?
This is a really important part, and is one way qualitative research is well suited to this work, as an emphasis is very much on engaging with subjectivity and with reflective practice. The fourth strategy is language promotion, promoting the use of Indigenous languages in research write-ups. Right now, English is the dominant language that most research is written up in.
So sorry, no speaking English. You come back later, okay?
Fifth, the internationalization of Indigenous experiences by assisting First Nations people, that's Indigenous people, to connect with each other. People around the world who've been subject to colonization, and enabling systems and structures that connect those people together so that they can engage in a joint struggle, a collective struggle. And finally, we have researching back. Now, I really like this idea, and here's one way of looking at how disciplines like psychology have been engaged in the silencing of Indigenous voices. Adopting a level of critical analysis. What we've got to do is adopt a level of critical analysis to uncover those colonial systems of colonization that have operated in disciplines like psychology.
We need to destroy ourselves!
What blinded those psychologists who knew about Bowlby's work on attachment theory, that blinded them to allow Aboriginal children to be taken away from their mothers? Now, this decolonization process has radically reshaped the role of Aboriginal people in research. Aboriginal people have gained power and status such that Aboriginal people are becoming partners and allies to researchers, not subservient subjects of research, and working collaboratively with researchers towards common goals. Now, research in psychology is slowly starting to take on a non-Western way of knowing, learning, and teaching. And dominant epistemologies are now being challenged, though we're really only at the start of this process at the moment. There is increased pressure on psychology not to pathologize the lives of Aboriginal people, and there is an increased movement in psychology not only to adopt qualitative research as a serious alternative to quantitative research, but also to focus on Indigenous research methodologies, ways of including Indigenous people in psychology that isn't oppressive. Now, here's a fabulous example of strengths-based research. It's research that was undertaken by Cherie Carney, and I put the TED Talk video up on the Moodle site for you, where she talks about her research into what Aboriginal knowledge can tell us about happiness. In that video, Cherie also talks about the way she and an Aboriginal community undertook the research. So it's a great talk on how an Indigenous knowledge system was incorporated into the research project. So head over to the Moodle site if you're not there already and watch the video. If you aren't on the Moodle site and can't get access to the Moodle site, I don't know where I'm pointing. Where am I pointing? Is it that way? I lost my sense of direction. I know the studio is virtually just behind me, but I can't quite remember where I'm sitting. Where am I sitting? It's not over there, is it? It's over there. There we go. Oh God, I've blown out the exposure now. It's over there, I think. So the link to the YouTube video is over there. Anyway, I'm going insane. Stop this. Let's close the video down now. So watch that video from Cherie. And yeah, I shall see you in the next part of Lecture 3, which I think is Lecture 3 Part 4. So till then, ta-da.